your job. Everyone else is doing their job. Just because you're the one on screen or the one holding a microphone doesn't make you special. The audience for motorsport is global, and you kind of know what the stories are of the day. From 13,000 feet to deliver a piece to camera, which you've only got one shot at, is exactly the same as interviewing a driver the second they've pulled up at the end of a stage or at the end of a race. I realized I had to diversify just to earn money and use my skills, but that quickly became something that I enjoyed. So you address the elephant in the room, and everyone in the TV truck and everyone in commentary needs you to do that. So you just presume that's what the audience needs as well. You've just got a job to do like everyone else, and if you mess it up, you're messing up everyone else's work.
Hello and welcome to Georgie's Stripping the Dipping. I'm your unusual co-host, F1BLAG. Georgina, the M of the podcast game, has another mission this week for Sean Connery, aka AMG Dens. So allow me to be your refreshing and timeless Pierce Brosnan today. So long as I'm not the second Aunt Viv, we'll be okay. Now, let me pause those 90s references. I could go on all day and introduce today's incredible guest. At Stripping the Dipping, we go beyond F1 and motorsport in search of life lessons and experience. So this guy is the perfect embodiment of that. If you're a fan of Formula E, the World Rally Championship, FIA Rallycross, or World Touring Car Championship, among others, you'll know him as a live reporter and presenter, but his talents stretch even further. The writer behind The Ultimate Rush, the man in National Geographic's Man vs. Ride, a stand-up comic who has appeared on lineups with the likes of Russell Brand and Harry Hill, a film, television, and stage actor, not to mention holding the mic for MTV and an Olympic Games in the World Cup. So, without further ado, welcome Neil Cole to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm just trying to think which James Bond. I guess I'm Timothy Dalton. I'm not so happy about that. Can I be Daniel Craig?
Because you can be Daniel Craig. Yeah. I was surprised you didn't go straight there. Yeah. But how are you? How things?
Yeah, pretty good. I've just had a very rare sort of 4 days off where I sort of kind of took myself away and did a lot of thinking and sweating in a sauna. That's not a great image, but like sauna, steam room, and a bit of a social detox. And I feel incredibly good for it. Catch me at a good, very zen moment.
Perfect. Well, that's absolute perfect raw materials for a good conversation. I mean, we were joking before the start about this being an interview, but hopefully not a job interview. Definitely don't want to emit those vibes. But, you know, in the intro, it's so clear that you've got so many things going on, so many things you've done. How would you sort of sum yourself up when you're introducing yourself to people? How would you describe Neil Cole?
That's a very good question. If it's a sort of social environment, I'm a bit of a chameleon. So I always, unfortunately, because I've been doing the sort of interviewing, journalism, reporting, live stuff for so long now, I apply a lot of my sort of techniques to sort of social situations as well. So in the same way, I'm constantly adjusting what I might ask a driver who's just finished a race. Depending on the person that I'm being introduced to and the environment that I'm in, I always sort of try and tailor it to what I think is the best thing. The most obvious one is just I tend to say I work in television, and then if they are more interested, then I expand a little bit more. The worst thing I can say is the one that I consider the most true, which is I'm an actor, because then the next question is always, oh, have I seen you in anything? And my horrible sarcastic response always wants to be, I don't know, I don't live with you. I don't know what you've watched. So, and it's an awful thing, but you immediately put yourself in a kind of defensive mode when someone asks you what you perceive as a really odd question. So I guess sort of professionally, that's what I say. I work in television, and then if they're genuinely interested, I can expand a little bit more. But like in your introduction, there's a lot that I do and want to do. And it's quite a lot for people to take on board. And I'm actually quite a humble person. So I don't want to appear like I'm boasting as well. So it's like I try and keep a lid on it unless it, opens up into an interesting conversation. The other way I introduce myself is that ever since I was a kid, I had the nickname Problem with Gravity. So that's how I always think of myself, as someone who has a problem with gravity, both in the sort of physics sense and in terms of seriousness.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about some of those problems with gravity you've had and the career you've made out of that. You were talking there about micro adjusting to the audience, and when I was sort of thinking about this conversation and how would I answer this question about you, I would sort of describe you as a prolific storyteller, and I don't know if that's fair. Sort of both sides of the camera, sometimes no camera. I mean, what are you most proud of the things that you've achieved so far?
I think you've nailed it. I think crucially, one thing that I am very sort of diligent about and have worked very hard at, but also I feel like I have an innate instinct, is storytelling. So you mentioned the one thing that sort of is a bit, not really a blip, but like something that stands out that I've done in the last sort of 10 years, which was Ultimate Rush, which was a very high-end documentary series for Redbull Media House about adventure sports, action sports. And I was the series writer, and it was a crazy hire because I did the last 2 seasons of it, and I took over from a Pulitzer Prize-winning screenwriter who'd done the first few series. So I was like, I don't know, but yes, storytelling is everything. You're at wherever I am, whatever job I'm doing, my sole purpose is to further the narrative. So if I'm a reporter, my interview with a driver or a pop star or an actor or whatever is just furthering the wider narrative. That's crucial. You're just a cog in a wheel. It's not about you. It's about your helping get the information out of the person. So that's one thing. But in terms of storytelling, that making Ultimate Rush was huge for me, because I had always been a writer. My degree, even though I always wanted to be an actor, my degree was in English and French literature, and I wrote a translation of Racine's Britannicus when I was 21. Writing and storytelling is something that I feel like I've got innate, and I've learned in the last kind of probably properly in the last 5 years that 9 times out of 10 I have to trust my instincts. My spidey sense will tell me this is the right place to be, this is the right way to go, this is the right thing to pick up on. And that Ultimate Rush series really sort of drew that out of me, because someone had done something incredible, and a skateboarder, a surfer, a proximity base suit wingsuit base jumper had done something insane. You could make a three-part series out of it, but you've got to get it down to 27 minutes. So you have to decide what the main story is and then build the show around that. And that's something I'm very proud of. And I presume they're still, they're somewhere on Red Bull TV. But all of those were kind of made just sort of before the big sort of launch of streaming, and so many documentary series now that use that kind of technique. But it's something I learned quite early on, and I apply a lot of those techniques across the board in everything I do, really.
That's it's fascinating, and you kind of mentioned 2 strands there. You talked about your degree, and you talked about what you'd learned, but you also talked about your spidey senses and the sort of innate instinct that you have. Did you always know that this was what you wanted to do from a young age?
No, I just presumed I was going to be a movie star. It was a very strange, circuitous route, and I'm very happy where I am, and I'm very lucky because I get to do all the things that I enjoy. And I honestly think if I were just doing one thing, my brain wouldn't be fed enough. So the fact that I do have a lot of different things that I do all the time, while it is a lot for my kind of internal hard drive to contend with, and sometimes my mental health struggles a little bit under the weight of data. Actually, I think this kind of Swiss Army knife career that I've got is probably best suited to me, because always at school I played rugby, but I also loved writing about poetry. I was a kind of an anomaly, not because I didn't sort of conform to any jocks versus geeks or God. I loved.
Yeah.
I was really into heavy metal and goth and Prince and hip hop, and so even musically, I was very diverse, and that's kind of I don't think I can exist just on one plane. I'm not talking multiverse wise. I'm just talking doing one thing. I think I'd get too bored.
Yeah.
So no, in answer to your question, I don't think I never really, apart from just presuming I was going to be a famous actor, which I very quickly realized was like, there's 1 in a million or maybe 1 in 100,000 to get to achieve that. I really quickly realized I had to diversify just to earn money and use my skills, but that quickly became something that I enjoyed. So I never really had a game plan. My original game plan, I was going to be a marine biologist. Until I realized it didn't just involve swimming with sharks. You'd just be in a lab in Bangor for most of your life. So I changed tack.
That was quite a popular sort of ideal career a few years ago, marine biologist.
Yeah.
You talked moving away from marine biologist, but actually you were kind of talking then about what the imagined reality is versus actually what it's like to be that. And similarly, I'm sure when you were dreaming of being a movie star as a child, you had certain images. I mean, thinking about the best bits of your job, what do you enjoy most, or what are the bits that you feel most privileged about?
I've been incredibly lucky. I mean, there's one job that I did which really sort of launched things for me, taught me a lot about storytelling, but also completely destroyed my bucket list. So my switch, I did 3.5 years as a main one of the pan-European VJ for MTV, sort of broadcasting live every day to something stupid like 110 million homes. And then when that ended, I got sort of tested for, and then had meetings, and then got the job that sort of took me curveball into motorsport, which was a show for Southern Pictures Television called Shakedown on the WRC. And that so I thought that MTV, because music was such a big thing and is such a big thing to me, that seemed like my natural home. But then that job, the show, the section of MTV that I was working for just ended. So it was like, despite how good one's work was and how well one was received, there wasn't a job for you anymore, which was one of my first sort of life lessons, which I'm sure we'll come back to later, is like knockbacks and not taking things personally. Anyway, when I got the job on Shakedown, we basically had 3 years of making a show which was showcasing the locations of where the World Rally Championship was happening, but making your own content. So my very small team, and this was early noughties, and so we kind of were making a road trip, documentary, travel, sport, hybrid show, sort of before that really was a thing. And we would turn up somewhere and they would go, so, I was, in terms of my bucket list, swimming with sharks in Australia and with dolphins in Turkey, skydiving in New Zealand, riding with the gauchos in Argentina, driving rally cars. It was the most incredible thing. And on top of doing all those things, it was work. I always had to learn how to link it back to the bigger picture, tell the story. How does this relate to the person at home without kind of going, haha, look at us, we're having a great time? And also, how do you link it to the WRC? How do you link it to the rally drivers? So that was a constant kind of a job to merge the things together. So while I was getting to have these amazing experiences, like the skydive I did in New Zealand was incredible, but I had to land and deliver a piece to camera as I landed. You've got one take at that. And I really thrive on that pressure. And you can relate that pressure even though, you know, a 45-second free fall from 13,000 feet to deliver a piece to camera, which you've only got one shot at, is exactly the same as interviewing a driver the second they've pulled up at the end of a stage or at the end of a race, and you're the first person they speak to, and you've got one take because you're live, have the right question ready. So I see it as exactly the same discipline. Your brain is going through maybe 15 questions that you've pre-prepared, or then you whittle it down to 10, and then you read their body language, you see their eyes, eye contact is crucial. So then maybe 10 more questions go into and all of this is happening in a second. So I genuinely think that of all the things I do in terms of motorsport TV, that pressure, that adrenaline that builds up to that moment where you have to say something, and it has to be the right thing to serve the storytelling. And sometimes it's not the thing the driver wants to hear. That's another thing, is you can't just say something positive. If something's gone wrong, you have to address the elephant in the room, and that's not easy because they might get angry, and I've had that. So I think that's probably the thing I enjoy the most, is that pinch point where all of the things that are in your head in the cloud just kind of have to galvanize, solidify, and one bolt of lightning has to come out of your mouth, and it's the live moment.
And we'll dive in a minute about sort of what is going on in your brain in those moments, and maybe it's very instinctive, but also sort of what are the tactics or the sort of tools you use to kind of nail it. But I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't ask you about the not so glamorous bits of the job. Sort of, otherwise they're going to think you're just sort of a adrenaline junkie. Maybe you are just an adrenaline junkie that swims with sharks and flies around. And but which bits of the job perhaps are less fun, or the bits that perhaps we don't see at home?
I'm never going to complain. I've been very lucky, but the travel, the sort of glamour of travel. When I was took my first plane trip when I was a teenager to go on holiday with my family, the glamour of that goes very quickly. If you counted it up, the number of weeks of my life I've probably spent waiting for a rental car form to be filled in properly, or luggage carousels, and it's can be quite lonely out there, and lots of behind the scenes near death experiences with driving on dangerous roads in a hurry to get somewhere, food poisoning in Argentina, altitude sickness in Bolivia, things that one of the lowlights, and luckily I share this with a group of other people, is when that Icelandic volcano erupted in 2010. I was working in Istanbul, and all the flights were grounded. So our production team put us on a bus home. So I was on a bus for 3.5 days to get back to London from Istanbul. Wow. And, it was quite a long time before I could get on a bus again because the buses give me PTSD, because that was horrific. And we're not talking like a rock band's tour bus. This was a coach.
Yeah.
And if you look at a map, how far it is from, you have to do, crossing several borders. The drivers got lost in Italy, and we lost about 4 hours. There's lots of stuff that happens, and in the end, they become a story. They become part of the adventure. And then the other side of it is, it's spending 3/4 of the year on the road isn't great for personal relationships. The mundane and prosaic side is the time you waste on planes or in hotels or whatever, but also family occasions that you miss, or relationships that dwindle away because they stop asking because you're just always away. So I think those are the downsides, but it's worth it, I guess, because I'm very lucky to be doing what I do.
No, and I don't think anyone would accuse you of sort of moaning about what sounds like, I couldn't even work out the route you would take back to get from Turkey to the UK, let alone in 3.5 days. But it doesn't sound particularly pleasant.
I can tell you, Greece, through Greece, a ferry from Greece, Igoumenitsa to Ancona into Italy, and then the rest of it's on land up through Italy, France. That's the route.
Through the Alps. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
In a bus.
Yeah, and it's not a holiday. You're not stopping like a
No.
sort of a tour. No. You're rushing to the next job, I expect.
Exactly.
So, look, we've heard about who you are, what your passions are, sort of how you sort of found yourself wanting to be an actor, marine biologist possibly, but then your path and your strengths. I'm a strong believer every human being has some unique perspective to share, and I'm sure that's some more than others. But Georgina, I know, is really keen to bring people on to this podcast that have that unique perspective in spades. So I'm really keen to hear a kind of Neil's eye view here, and to try and learn what's going on in your brain when you're doing the things you do best. So, I mean, there are a few things here. But you did talk about sort of the skydive and then having a 45-second shot to camera that you can only do once and have to nail it. But maybe more regularly at the end of a race, you've got to ask exactly the right question to the driver, get exactly the information that the viewer needs. What's going on in your brain? You talked about having 15 questions coming in and out in a second. What are you trying to achieve, and how do you make that work?
The key thing there, and this is I suppose my take on it, is your job, one's job, is to transmit information, energy, and positivity through the lens to the viewer. So whether that's a really nice, beautiful studio where you've got all the time in the world and an auto cue and you can just speak at length into the camera, or you're hustling to the end of a stage and you have to interview a driver in the dust or the wet. Those are the key things. Again, it's not about you as a human. It's not about you as an ego. It's about the bigger picture, and transmitting that through the medium of cameras and sound is all you've got to do. Because if you fail to do that, the audiences, I think people underestimate the average viewer of anything, whether it's a feature film or a motorsport broadcast. Viewers at home have an instinct if something's good or right or feels correct. And I think one of the things I work at, but also hopefully have an ability to do, is understand that is my job. And I do quite often give myself a kind of reset if I find myself and I've got caught up in all kinds of stupid, petty brain fog of so and so did this, or so and so's said this about me, or I've read something unpleasant on Twitter. I quite often have to do like a full system defrag, default restore, and go, that none of that's relevant. Your job right now, regardless of all of that, is to get this transmitted to the people at home who can't be there. So you be there for them. You are their avatar. You are their conduit to a very special place that you're privileged to be at. So suck it up and do your job. I think that's probably my mantra, is do your job. Everyone else is doing their job. Just because you're the one on screen or the one holding a microphone doesn't make you special. You've just got a job to do like everyone else. And if you mess it up, you're messing up everyone else's work. So just do your job. That's probably my boiled down to the pearl in the oyster. That's probably what my philosophy is. Do your job.
And you do your job. I mean, let's take that mantra away. I suppose the follow-up question is how, because you can put as much effort as you like, and I'm sure a lot of it does come down to passion and energy and effort. But the how is the value. It's the uniqueness. So you're talking a bit about the audience there. How do you connect with an audience, particularly if you're saying you're out of your home country 3/4 of a year? Like, how do you know what the audience wants?
That's a very good question. I mean, the sort of banal answer to that is you're guided by the editorial team that have put you there and decided why you're there and what the story is. So technically, at the end of a race or at the end of a stage, I tend to have two things minimum going on in my earpiece or earpieces at that time. I can often hear the commentator, sometimes hear the commentator, so I know what they've been talking about. But I can also hear the gallery and the producers and the director and the vision mixer and the timings PA. So with those things going on, you know technically what you need to talk about, but you also have done your research, and luckily, whether you're at home or the audience for motorsport is global, and you kind of know what the stories are of the day. If Sebastian Loeb lost a wheel and he gets to you at the end of the stage, then you're not going to say, what's it like having a new co-driver? Do you know what I mean? You address the elephant in the room, and everyone in the TV truck and everyone in commentary needs you to do that. So you just presume that's what the audience needs as well. So you don't always know exactly what the audience wants, but you're in the strongest position to guess. And I think that's fundamentally that's true, for a lot of journalism. And I don't necessarily call what I do journalism, but if you're going to write a big article that's got a lot of facts in it, you're still guessing that that's what people want to hear. You're presuming, based on your journalistic instincts, that that's the right story to cover, and I'm just kind of doing the same. So I don't think I'm ever 100% sure, but I've learned to trust that instinct.
That's really fascinating. I hadn't, obviously you see the reporter or presenter with the earpiece in, but I literally hadn't thought, like, who's in the ear, who's talking to you, what are they saying? All while you're talking about having 15 thoughts entering and exiting your brain every second. I mean, picking up on a bit about narratives and what the elephant in the room is, without getting into specifics, there are occasions when you watch certain motorsports or, you watch certain sports, whatever, and they're not addressing the elephant in the room, or perhaps it feels like they have their own narrative that they're projecting onto the conversation.
Yeah, right. And as a viewer at home, you hate it. You're like, what are they doing? And that's what I was saying before about not underestimating your audience. Is people at home will be shouting at the telly going, why aren't you talking about this thing that's happening in front of our eyes? And that makes bad television. You have to address the thing that everyone will be talking about. Get it out of the way, because that's clearly what everyone wants to know about. So it's your job to address it. And yeah, I've been in positions where the producers or someone has kind of said, don't talk about this, or you're just about to ask the question that you have crystallized in your brain as the one question to ask, and the producer says something completely the opposite in your ear. It's like a millisecond before you open your mouth to ask your question, and then you have to decide whether you're going to fight City Hall on that. If you're going to go, nope, I'm going to stick to my guns, because maybe you don't know that producer very well, and you haven't built up a rapport with them and learned how to tell stories together. So sometimes you do have to fight City Hall, but it's not always welcome.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that you talked about building up a relationship and trust with the producer, and so you might then give them the benefit of the doubt that they know something that they can't explain to you in the moment as to why you shouldn't mention X or you should mention Y. But are there any specific situations you can recall where you did trust your gut, and you mentioned it might not be welcome at all times? Has that ended badly for you, or do you generally have a good judgment of when to push through?
I think, I've definitely made mistakes. Probably every job I do, I probably get one thing wrong, and I kind of I go back and reassess and think, what could I have done better? So I can't think of any specific instance, but what I can think of is the opposite, where and it's going to be tricky because I'm going to dance around names and championships here, but basically I did the opposite. I had to do the opposite once, where there was a job I was doing and I'd done it consistently for years, and a new production team took over, and we had this big briefing where they sort of the executive producer said, we want to shake this up, we want to make this different, we want to ask the difficult questions, we want to not make this a cozy place for these drivers, we want to really put them on the spot. And I was like, ooh, this sounds horrible. But I didn't question it, because I thought, okay, I'm happy to go along with this. It's a new challenge for me. And literally my first interview of the first session of that weekend was with a driver I'd never met before. And again, that's the other thing, is you build up trust and confidence with your team, but you also build up over the years and days trust and confidence with drivers and athletes. And so I was put on the spot and told in my ear to ask this question, which I felt like, grit as it was coming out of my mouth, of this driver. And he just crumpled before my very eyes. Like, he was completely crestfallen by the tone and the content of my question, and just couldn't respond. Like, it was a failing on his part, because he should have been not such a baby and not a bit better media trained to deal with a question like the one I asked. But it was so uncomfortable for me, and he reacted very badly, sort of slightly pushed me on camera, and then I wrapped up the interview. And then as we wrapped the interview, he actually properly sort of pushed me and said, "Dude, you can't ask me a question like that. What the F was that?" And it was I was absolutely crushed, and I still feel the pain of that now, because I had failed my audience, I had failed the storytelling, I had failed my instincts, but I had done what my producer told me to do. And then I think it was like an hour and a half until I was next called upon to do an interview, and I just spent the hour and a half just feeling like I wanted to crawl into a hole. It was awful. So that's the kind of flip side of it, is when you haven't built up that rapport, you're forced to do something that you're uncomfortable with, and that's the result. It was the kind of perfect storm of a horrible moment of live TV. But again, everything's a learning. I could probably have phrased it differently. I could have used more of my instincts to be more sensitive about it. But ultimately, I just thought, on this occasion, I'm going to do what I'm told, which doesn't always come naturally to me.
Well, some of the career path you've trodden, and the MTV, the sort of music that you mentioned you're into, etc., that you don't strike me as the sort of guy that's hugely conformist. So, yeah, following that instinct or going against that instinct must be tough at times. So we've talked. Actually, this is quite a technical conversation, because you're giving us exactly what it's like to be on the spot, having to deliver under pressure, and there'll be many people that in general can relate to that. But I want to move to something that most people can relate to in their day-to-day, which is sort of on the mental health side and on the kind of actually achieving what you want to achieve side. So, we've talked about the fact you're a writer, producer, actor, presenter, stand-up, etc., you name it. I mean, you must be a busy guy. You've talked about the kind of travel and, that the highs of the adrenaline and the lows of, being live on TV and it not quite working out. What's your secret to keeping everything balanced and keeping yourself well?
Frankly, I don't have a secret, and I don't necessarily have the balance. I think I'm as close now to getting it right as I've ever been. But no, it's not easy. You never properly switch off. My career, because I'm a freelancer, all of the different jobs that I do, I'm in a constant round of, when will I work again? Most winters, because most championships are seasonal, most winters I face a genuinely blank calendar and wonder if the jobs that employed me last year are going to employ me again. There is never any continuity, and that's really hard to take. So you never feel secure. You never feel that you've settled. And there've been maybe 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years where I kind of went, "Oh, this is great. This is the kind of nirvana of job security that I've been dreaming of." And then that horrifically crashes around you, burns to the ground, and you're like, well, why was I craving that? Because that's worse. So I don't have any kind of, I do a lot of cycling. When I'm home, I cycle, and I do a lot of processing when I'm on the bike. I do exercise in the house, a bit of yoga, but I I go for walks. I've got some nice green tree areas around me, so if I need to, I'll go for a walk. But I make sure that I switch off. Like I watch, I go to the cinema, I go to watch bands. I try and do all the things that I've always done that are like my kind of touchstone, and that that when you're away for 4 days, 10 days, 40 days, whatever it is, the things that you've got to look forward to. So I always try and have something in the diary that's a gig to go to, or a film that's coming out, or a new series I'm going to watch. And I try and have that as something that I can project forward to and kind of go, even if I'm having a good time on this job, or if I'm having a bad time on this job will be over, for better or for worse. And then I'll be back, and then I'll do that. So I think it's a question of trying to see things with a more long-term view, just kind of being able to recognize that whatever state you're in right now, good or bad, will pass. And that's something that I think I spent, a lot of my 30s not handling very well. And I think and the other thing is that I'm not fiercely ambitious. I don't spend a lot of my time sort of hustling to try and get more work, which I think is a failing of my part, but it means I sleep better at night. I'm not someone who's constantly looking 2 rungs up the ladder thinking I should be there. I'm just kind of okay where I am. While that does mean that, I have holes in my calendar where I go, am I ever going to work again? Oh, does this mean I've retired now? That happens to me twice a year at the moment, but touch wood, it hasn't actually ground to a halt yet, so I have to trust the process, I guess. But I know, I'm very aware that my mental health veers wildly into the changing lanes at times, and I'm not the easiest person to live with for the people closest to me sometimes, because I come back from a trip and I'm exhausted and a massive adrenaline slump, and I have to readjust to civilian life, and then while I'm doing that, I'm kind of dealing with meetings, emails, information, research about 3 other jobs that are coming up in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So I do sometimes need kneel time, downtime. And I've kind of learned more recently, like if I need to take myself off to go surfing for a few days and just shut everything out, then I've learned that I'm allowed to do that. I've got myself in a position that doesn't make me a bad person if I have to just do that.
It sounds to me, and I think we're all on a path, we're all learning, that kind of one of the key facts that you were mentioning there is self-awareness. So being aware that you don't have it all under control, but knowing where you are on the spectrum, or trying to be conscious of that sounds key.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is a sense of the reality of all of it, and the space, your space in it at that moment. It's probably like an amateur mindfulness, I guess. Like I'm aware of where I am right now. I'm still alive, and I've got a roof over my head. Everything must be okay. One step at a time. It's really crucial. And the other thing is about it's about kindness and understanding. Like ego. Everyone in this business. Everyone has an ego, because we couldn't do what we do without an ego. But every ego has the underneath the sort of damp underside of the ego stone is crushing low self-esteem or problems or grief, and everyone has that. So the flip side of being able to do what we do is often quite sort of dark. And I'm very aware, most of my friends and colleagues in this business, some of whom are insanely successful, and some of whom, at the moment, could really do with some more work. At every level, everyone's carrying their own sort of pain bag. And as long as you acknowledge that and are aware of yours, and it doesn't sort of drag you down with it, you're doing okay.
Thanks. And I hope, those that are listening kind of take that on board. I think we all could benefit from listening to one another, and that anything that we have in our toolkit to manage where we are or be aware of it is vital. So thanks for opening up on that, and I really appreciate it. Let's move to motorsport and talk a bit about that. I know lots of our listeners will be really interested to hear from you. You talked a bit about leaving MTV and getting the job at Shakedown, and that, I think you said, was your sort of way in professionally to motorsport. But were you into motorsport before that? Do you have a first memory of sort of motorsport or cars or bikes or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I used to watch every Grand Prix on the TV with my dad. That was like our Sunday afternoon ritual, and rallies and on the Saturday, and then occasionally go out to watch stock cars or speedway or both happening at the same grass track. And also, I think my dad sort of fancied himself as a bit of a rally driver through the country roads where I grew up. So involuntarily, I think I experienced that sort of the co-driver's seat or sliding around the back seat of a Vauxhall Chevette before rear seatbelts were invented. So no, I loved motorsport and adventure sports. Like I raced BMXs. I was kind of first generation BMX racer, and I've always been a skateboarder. But in terms of motorsport, I can always remember that it was a really precious. The two things that I always cling on to, because I lost my father a few years ago, and I cling to was watching the Formula One Grand Prix with him and listening to music with him, were the two sort of the most cozy. It's like a proper sense memory of that's a kind of happy place. So yeah, no, it was a big part of my life as a sort of fan, and I never even considered. So yeah, in terms of career advice, ignore the rest of this, because I did not get into motorsport the way you're supposed to get into motorsport. I was a fan, but my skill set was very much entertainment TV. And then a combination of North One Television and Sony Pictures in LA saw something in me that they wanted to bring into motorsport, and then my life changed permanently. I went on a sort of perpendicular career path from that moment.
So let me follow up on that, and it's the sort of unfair question that a parent would never answer, but you've covered so many different series and sports. I mean, you've covered, I didn't mention all of the sort of extreme sports that you've looked at as well, but what's your favorite series, talking about motorsport, either to watch or to cover? Are you able to pick a favorite, or is it a bit like a parent with their child?
No, not at all. I mean, I've always loved Formula One, and I'm working in, for the first time in the last 2 years, I've been working on a project with McLaren. So actually, for the first time properly, I've actually got contact with F1, which is nice. But I think in a way it's been really good for me, because I absolutely adore Formula One, and I've been watching it for 3.5 decades now, or 4 decades, whatever it is. And I think the fact that I haven't worked in it is, I've not been on the grid, I've not been in the paddock, I've not been at the races professionally. It's probably a good thing. It's kind of kept it on its pedestal for me. So in terms, as a fan, that's still pristine. As a professional, I think probably the two happiest series I've worked on, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. The 6 or 7 years that I did that as the main sort of host for Eurosport, and the last few years hosting the studio show with Tom Christensen. And I love endurance racing. It completely fries my brain every time. It's the middle of the night, you can hardly stand up, and yet they're still racing the same car, and all of them, all 60 cars, if they, probably by then it's about 40 cars, are still going, and they've still got another 12 hours. So I really I'd love to do some more endurance racing. So the 24 Hours of Le Mans stands out as something that I love to be part of when I'm part of it. But in terms of like the opposite end of the spectrum, sort of 8 years I worked on World Rallycross. Is, you know, that you couldn't be more diametrically opposed. They're the shortest races. They're over in a flash. They're 4 laps or 6 laps, and a lot happens in those 4 or 6 laps, and it's a constant turnover of story, and action, and incredible performances by human athletes who can do things that you or I presumably can't do. So I think professionally, those two have probably been the things that I've cherished working on the most, because they're so different, both professionally, you know, the techniques you have to employ, but just the racing. I absolutely adore both types of racing.
It's quite a broad spectrum you've covered there. I mean, sort of thinking back to your track record, your CV, and this is again not a job interview, but you know, you've got a varied sort of understanding of the entertainment world and another varied understanding of the motorsport world. It's perhaps self-evident that motorsports are always trying to expand their audience. And as you know, as someone that has spanned both of those worlds, you know, we talk about F1, you know, what they're doing on Drive to Survive, their kind of stated objectives, Liberty Media's stated objectives to kind of grow the sport. What do you think they could do? What more could they do to attract a larger viewership? Do you have an opinion on that?
I'm just going to move because my neighbour has brilliantly started mowing their lawn, so apologies if the sound went wrong.
That's the sun coming out in England for a short period, and then everyone deciding to mow their lawn.
So do you want to go for that again? Sorry.
Sure. I mean, your background, you've got a lot of experience in entertainment. You've got a lot of experience in motorsport and other sports as well. And you know, it's perhaps self-evident that motorsports are always trying to expand their audience. You know, as someone that spans both of those worlds, the sports world, the entertainment world, and perhaps sports entertainment, if we want to call it that, we see F1 working hard to grow its viewership. Presumably, as a fan, you watch the product. Do you have a sense of what more they could be doing, or what you see them doing in that pursuit?
Well, firstly, I'd love Drive to Survive, and I think right from the first season, when everyone was very skeptical about it and hardcore fans were very skeptical, I just bought into it straight away because it applies that beautiful the storytelling, the human story, to something that has been closed for so long. You know, that could never have existed in the Bernie era, but it's not even that. It sort of exists in its own plane. The way that they tell the stories, they decided that they weren't going to tell the story of the season going race by race. Genius. They were, you know, it's each episode is its own. So you watch a series and you're kind of, hang on, we're in Barcelona again on episode 7. What? But it's such a clever way to do it because you're immersed in the world, and actually it's already, spoiler alert, that season's happened. Verstappen won, and now we're going back. You know, you don't need to tell the story and show the championship standings and go, well, that was the race, let's hear from the drivers, like a traditional broadcast. And the freedom of that is brilliant. So I think there's a lot of freedom in there. There's a lot of really good storytelling. And naturally, you know, this generation of drivers, the millennials, the Gen Zs, and the next, whatever comes next, Gen A? What does come next? I don't know.
I think it's Alpha.
Alpha, okay. You know, those humans, those young humans, that's how they consume content. So why wouldn't they want to be involved? Why wouldn't they embrace having? But just the way they went about it, you know, it's very hard to get access to those drivers and to get, you know, sticking a boom over a private conversation when something's gone wrong, even just for the sound engineer, the boom operator is at risk of someone being really angry at them. They're taking a risk. Or the person who's got to retrieve a radio mic that's just been thrown in the bin because Christian Horner doesn't want, to hear what he just said, whatever. All of the risks that they took have paid off massively, and they're, seeing the rewards of it. And this isn't meant to sound immodest. It's very similar to what we tried to do, and I think succeeded in doing with Shakedown, because we took the drivers out of their context, out of their helmets, out of their rally cars, and took them somewhere else and explored their personalities a bit. And that's the greatest compliment I used to get was out on a rally stage somewhere in, I don't know, Finland or South America, and a rally fan would come up and say, "Can I just say, my wife has never sat down and watched rally with me. She hates motorsport, but now because of Shakedown, she will watch the rally with me and go, oh, that's Sebastian Loeb, I like him, or that's Marcus Grönholm's really funny, so let's watch the rally this weekend." And that was the biggest compliment ever, is that you've opened the sport up to casual observers. And I think Drive to Survive has done that. But fundamentally, you can't make someone like football. That's the thing, is that you're never going to convert everyone, because there will always be people who don't like the sport, and that's okay. People are allowed to have their opinions, but if you can showcase it in a way that you reveal the humans behind the visor, then you've got a good chance.
Yeah, and you were not being immodest, because at the beginning of the conversation, when you were talking about the concept of Shakedown and Ultimate Rush, I did have sort of, that sounds a lot like what they did later with Drive to Survive in my head. So, I mean, I think credit to you for getting there a bit earlier. To provide maybe the kind of straw man rebuttal on Drive to Survive, I think the criticism that I see online sometimes is from people that perhaps aren't the target audience, and so they don't really understand why it's sort of going from basics and not purist following the sport. And then the second is that on occasion, perhaps there are things that are either very slightly factually wrong, or where people online might. So we're back after a minor technical issue, but I think we caught the end of Neil's answer on Drive to Survive, and the way that Formula One can attract a much larger viewership. In closing the interview, I had a couple of sort of final questions. I hope they're not too quirky. I think what we've learned today is that there's a lot going on that we don't see, be that with people and their mental health, be that with TV and the voices in your ear, the pressure, the relationships, the trust, the production, getting from one country to another. So, Neil, tell us something that we would never have suspected about Neil Cole.
Wow. Okay. No, I don't really know. I'm just going to alienate whatever I say. I'm going to alienate everyone on one side. No, I don't. I think I guess like most people, you can't help but sort of slightly suffer from imposter syndrome. Like a lot of my life, especially when I was on MTV, because you would turn up to do a thing and people would look at you and kind of go, "You're an MTV presenter." And it always felt like that moment in Star Wars where Princess Leia goes, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?" Like I've lived my life feeling like Luke Skywalker disguised as a stormtrooper. So I think the one thing that I kind of, if I could have a badge or a tattoo, I'm not allowed a tattoo. If I could anything that I'm kind of, so I mentioned earlier that sort of my nickname when I was a kid was Problem with Gravity. And then I've always felt like I had a weird relationship with gravity. Like I used to jump off things when I was very young and end up in hospital. And then I've always done adventure sports. And if you ever look at my socials, wherever I am in the world, I'll always do a jumping picture. But I always had this instinct that I could sort of defy gravity. And it sounds ridiculous. I'm not a freaking superhero, but when I hosted that show Man vs. Ride for National Geographic, one of the things, because it was a kind of pop science documentary about why we enjoy thrill rides, what happens to the human body when you're on a roller coaster, or blah blah blah. And for it, I had to go in the human centrifuge that they used to train fighter pilots in Farnham, and the whole process is very scary. And then they spin you round, and again, it's like, what was, I think, is it Moonraker? There's a Roger Moore James Bond where he does it, and they try to use it to kill him. So that gives you an idea of how extreme it is as an experience. But basically, there's a point at which the blood drains through your brain past the optic nerve, so you go blind, but that's okay. But then after that, most humans pass out, and there are things you can do to stop yourself passing out. But and that's called G-LOC, gravity-induced loss of consciousness. And we did it, and I did sustained over 6G without losing consciousness. And afterwards, an actual doctor said, "Neil, you're unusually resistant to the forces of gravity. You're technically a G monster." And I was like, as an adult, a question that I've been asking the universe since I was about 4 was answered by an actual doctor. So it's like a fact about me that is unusual that people might not suspect is I am a G monster and unusually resistant to the forces of gravity.
That's not a sentence or a collection of words that I thought I'd hear. But yes, Mr. G Monster, thank you so much for everything you've given us today. It's been really fascinating to get to know more about you. Is there anything that you're working on at the moment that you want to shout out? Where can we find you online?
Well, I'm pretty easy on Twitter is Neil Cole, and Instagram is the Neil Cole, and I've got a website. And if anyone's welcome to ask me questions, work-wise or anything. I'm always happy to help. It's funny because the way that things sort of go full circle, and the way, like, just a film that always resonates from when I saw it when I was very young is Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. That kind of philosophy of things will happen, things in a very sort of non-spiritual, non-religious way. I do believe that the things reveal themselves given time, and you don't have to push them. So if you build it, they will come. And we just lost Ray Liotta, which is very sad. But in November, I had a part in a feature film, a lead part in a feature film, which, if you'd asked me at the age of 14, what would be your dream role, the very naive, very sort of gung-ho 14-year-old Neil would have said, "Oh, I'd like to be a space marine in the future who flies back to Earth to save the planet by fighting aliens." I made that film. I did that job in November. It was an absolute dream. It kind of it made me do loads of, I got in physically the best shape I've ever been in to play this character. I spent 3 weeks filming it, and honestly, I spent so much of the last 2 decades thinking, am I ever going to achieve what I wanted to do in acting? I've taken a massive sort of sidestep into presenting and producing and writing, and I'd sort of not quite given up on acting, but I kind of thought, well, if it doesn't happen, I can deal with that. And then I did that, and that film is called Sentinel, and at some point when they finish all the visual effects, it will come out. So there's a couple of films coming out, which you can see what the films that I've done and stuff on my IMDb page. But basically, I'm just going to keep on keeping on. I'm working on the FIA ETCR, which is the electric touring cars. I still work as a producer on Formula E. I'm hosting a thing this weekend for McLaren Formula One. So I'm just going to carry on doing all the things I do, and you're very welcome to dip in and out of enjoying them. And the other thing is that I don't really have a social media strategy. So the things that do the best on my Instagram are the reels I make of my little friendly squirrel that comes in my back door and I feed nuts to with my hand. So go figure, I can pay a professional photographer to take the most amazing photographs of me in amazing locations, but that's the stuff that people want. So
well, maybe you've identified your next gig. country files.
Yeah, you know what? If I hadn't done this, I think I'd have wanted to be, David Attenborough or Chris Packham. That's another big passion of mine. So you never know. I think that's probably why I wanted to be a marine biologist, because all of that side of the world fascinates me.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much again, Neil, for your time. For the interest of continuity, what a brilliant Monaco Grand Prix that was last weekend. And the Indy 500 topped it off. Normal service will be resumed next week, where Sean Connery, aka AMG Dens, returns. This is Pierce Brosnan, aka F1BLAG, joined by, I think we agreed it was Daniel Craig, aka Neil Cole. Thanks again for your time. Tune in next time on Georgie's Stripping the Dipping.